Welcome to this screencast on HTML basics. I'm going to cover the basics of HTML 4 or 5. What is HTML? It's the hypertext markup language. It's the basis of the World Wide Web. The web pages are built generally using HTML. That's what's transmitted back and forth is the HTML documents. The document is just an ASCII or a UTF-8 text document. It is actually text, it's defined, and that's it. And it's used by web browsers to present text and graphics. So the web browser gets this HTML document, it parses the document, and then renders the document, and making the beautiful web pages that we all see. And HTML documents include markup tags and plain text to describe the contents of the document. That's how the browser is able to know how to render an image, what font it's supposed to be doing, what is a heading, what is all these other different kinds of things, because the markup tags help give the context of the text in the document. So there are many different versions. It started in 1991 with HTML. We've moved on. In 2000, they came out with XHTML, which is an extension that was trying to make HTML much more like XML, so it's easier to parse, much more rigorous. In 2012, they came out with HTML5, and in 2013, XHTML5 was defined, and it has basically not been adopted, and we're just using HTML5. So that's the standard that we're using today. I'm going to be talking about mostly pre-HTML5 features in this screencast. So what is a basic HTML page? It has a DOCTYPE tag that explains what version of the HTML you're using. It has an HTML tag with a closing tag that defines the HTML document. Often has a head tag and then some information in the head, and then a body tag, and then the actual contents of the document that is displayed to the user. The title is normally displayed at the top of the browser, and the stuff in the head is not normally displayed to the user, except for the title. The body is what you actually see in your browser. So the DOCTYPE defines the document type, or the version of HTML that you're using. Primarily, we're going to be talking about HTML5. So that's the DOCTYPE that uses HTML. You'll often see the older version of 4.01, and that uses this DOCTYPE capital, and then it refers to the HTML4 document definition. DTD is the definition of what the contents are going to be for this, what is a valid tag and what's not a valid tag. But we'll be mostly talking about HTML5. This screencast will be talking about things that are in common in both 4 and 5. What are HTML tags and elements? Basically, they are keywords surrounded by brackets, and they are like HTML head and body, and they normally come in pairs. They don't all have to come in pairs, and they define the HTML elements. So like the HTML tag, everything between the open HTML tag and the end HTML tag is an element that has sub-elements in it. So what are some basic tags? The HTML element showed you the head, showed you the body. In the example, showed you H's, which are headings. They're just defined. A heading 1's larger than a heading 6. Paragraphs are for grouping text together. Normally there's spaces between the paragraph. Images are an image tag, a source attribute. We'll talk about briefly. Supposed to have an alt attribute. Images generally don't get closed. That's the one of the few that don't actually have closing tags associated with them. Comments have the special bang dash dash. You can close off with a dash dash. They're not rendered by anything. They're just a way of allowing developers to give more information about the HTML that's in the document. If you take a look at this link, there's a list of all the defined tags. It talks about what are HTML4, what are HTML5, what are been removed and added. So it's a good resource to see what the defined HTML tags are. So an element, any of these tags, beginning and end tags, is an element. Elements may have attributes that are specific or allow you to provide additional information about the particular element that you are using or is there. they are specified in the start tag of the element. So your attributes are always in the start tag of the element. Attributes are name value pairs. So you say attribute Fred equals and then the value. And the name could be things like ID, class, anything you want, and then the value is the value. Names are considered, should be lowercase, and values should be quoted, because you can have, there's basically just strings. You can have spaces, you can have all sorts of characters in the string. There are some standard attributes, or very common attributes. The ID attribute is a unique ID for this element. ID values should be unique to the page on which that element is. It's not good to have duplicate IDs in HTML elements on the same page. There's a lot of, you normally select by ID, and when you have duplicates, it's very confusing as to which element you're going to get. The class attribute is a string that has one or more classes that is used by style sheets to help the browser render that element. Style is an inline cascading style sheet for the element. So you can actually change the style of an individual element inline in the style attribute. You can do that in that beginning of the tag. And a title attribute is a tooltip information, so if you hover your mouse over the element, the title will be popped up in a tooltip. Nice, handy, helpful, or helper tool, so you can provide tooltips and make, help for your web page. An example of some attributes: we have a div element. The attribute class has two classes in it, modal and fade. The ID of this div is add organization modal. We have a tab index. We have a role. We have area labeled by and area hidden. So those are the attributes for this particular div. So we can create more, remove them. So it's a very powerful way of giving more flexibility to the actual HTML elements. You can now see that this div is different than other divs because it has a specific ID. So what is in the head element of the HTML document? It's the container for headings. What are kinds of things? What is the title of this document? What will be on the browser? The title is normally rendered in the top, saying that we're on page Hello World or whatever. Often you put style information, just like you could put it in the individual elements by adding the style attribute. You can also style this page by putting a style tag and then defining styles for this page. You can use meta tags to provide meta information about the document. Often that's what tools are being used, who the organization is, those kinds of things are what's normally done in the meta information. Link tags define relationships to an external source. That's how you might be able to include things into this document, like including some style or including some other JavaScript things. You can include other resources into this HTML document by using the link tag. The script tag is client-side script that you can define functions or things and behavior in your script tag. You can do this in the head, or you can also do this in the body. The no script tag will display a message if scripting is disabled in the client. So if the client has turned off scripting, this message in the no script tag will be displayed to the client, maybe telling them that maybe they should turn on scripting so that they can get a much more rich experience with your web page. And the base tag defines any base URL targets for the links in this page. So it's like adding a specific base to the hrefs in the rest of this page. Excuse me, the link tags. The body element defines the document's body. This is what the client is going to see, the things in the document that the browser renders for the user. It contains all the content of the HTML document that is seen by the user. So it's got text, hyperlinks, images, tables, lists, blocks, forms, and a whole lot of other stuff. We're going to talk briefly about each of these things to help show some of the what the tags look like and how you would use them. So text, you can have text in your web pages. You put some text, you often wrap it in a paragraph or P so that that will give it some spacing. You could put any element can have text. Some elements it doesn't make so much sense to have text, but you can put text in any element. The text is between the open tag and the end tag. Link tags define a hyperlink which you can click on to go to another page, go to another resource, go to another thing. And the href attribute, very specific, defines the destination of the link. So the example here, we have a link. We say the destination is localhost, ICS 415, basic HTML. So if I click on this link, I will go to the web page, basic HTML, at localhost with the path ICS 415. So we've got the HTTP protocol, the host, and then the full path to the resource. And then we close the A tag with a /A. And the basic information is the text for this link. Image tags allows you to define an image in an HTML page. It must have two attributes. In the previous example, I kept out the alt. Alt is used for browsers or other things where they can't render the image, so they'll render the alt in it. The source is the link to the image resource. So again, it's a URL to a image resource. There are many different types of image resources, PDFs, JPEGs, PNGs, etc. Alt is the caption for the image that will sometimes be rendered instead of the image of the tool. So you have an image tag, you have your source attribute, you have your alt attribute, and again, for the image tag, you don't need to have a closed /image tag, but you can. Tables. Tables define the table, sort of like the table you're looking at right now. The table tag defines the table. There is a border attribute that controls whether or not you have a border around each cell. The T head is a group very much like the head. It groups heading information, so you could have rows in the header, and then you have these THs, which are header cells. They're normally rendered slightly different than your normal body. Often they're bolded, but again, so it's based on how the client is rendering it or any style that you apply. You can have a caption, which is often in the header, but it just needs to be in the table. It's a table caption. You can create column groups. Again, this is often in the header, the T head. You have a column group for grouping columns, often used for formatting. And then you have individual columns, which will provide properties for each column in the call group. Again, you probably put some attributes that allow you to do things with styles to change the columns. Then you have the body of the table. This is where you most of the data is in the body. You have the TR, which defines the row. It can be used both in the head and the body. And then the TD is the cell in the table. So it's just general body, table in the cell. And then you have the foot. You can have the footer information on the table. Again, you could have it groups things into footer content. So tables are a very useful way of laying out information in web pages. You often see it in web pages. You can actually do a lot of layout in a table. In fact, back before style sheets, you really had to do it in tables, and it's not a great way of doing it, but it is an interesting way of doing things. There are lists. You have ordered lists, which have numbered or lettered. You use the OL tag, you close it off. The LI tag is just a list item. You could put list items in ordered list or unordered list. Unordered list, use bullets and icons, or like these are unordered lists on this page. Again, you put list items in the ordered or unordered list. And the third type of list is a description list, which has a sort of a title or a word or something, and then a description for that particular thing. So you use the DT to define the title or the thing that's being described, and then you use your DD to provide a description of the title. There are generic HTML blocks. Div, which I showed you earlier on in an example, it's just an element that can contain other HTML elements. Or a span, which is inline. So we span, they're all horizontally inline. Div, they're normally blocked. They're mostly used for styling versus using cascading style sheets, which we'll talk about in a future screencast. You often put things like in the example I had, you had some classes to help you define that, and inside that div you'll probably have another set of HTML elements that are inside that dialog, which is a modal dialog. So you would use a whole bunch of divs with possibly IDs and classes to help you lay out your HTML document instead of having to use the table to do the layout. And the last HTML element that I'm going to talk about today is forms that are used for passing information from the client back to the server. The tag is the form tag. It has a name which identifies or is the name of the form. It has an action, which is the URL where we're going to send the information in the form to. It's the URL where we're sending the data to. And then we have a method, which is the HTTP method to use when we do the send. We can use a get method, or we could use a post method. In the HTTP screencast, we talked about the different methods. So we can use either the get method or the post method. In the get method, the information is encoded in the URL. In the post method, the information is encoded in the request body. That's the difference between the get and the post. Also, a post is you're saying, I want to append this information to the resource. The get is saying, I'm requesting the resource with this query string attached. So forms, the form tag can include the following elements: an input, which is a field for where you can enter, user can enter data; a text area, which is a big text area for multi-line input; a button, which is a clickable button, often could be used for submitting the data or something; a select, which is a drop-down list of choices. Options are the choices in a select. So those are the drop-down choices, individual choices. The opt group tag allows you to group options into groups. Field set allows you to group these inputs, text areas of buttons. Often it's rendered with a border around it. Often doesn't have to be, but generally browsers will put a border on it unless you style it differently. And then a label allows you to define a label associated with a specific input. So here's an example of a form, very simple form. I don't have a label in this one, but I could have put a label for the username and made it associated with the input user. So this form's name is input, its action is to example HTML, so that's a URL that will be used, and the method is post. So when the submit button is pressed, or the submit input is pressed, a post request to example HTML with the value in the user input will be sent. The value, the text value in that text box will be put into the request body and sent to example. The request will be sent to example HTML. And that's sort of what that renders without any styling. That's the default sort of base rendering. So the input type submit is a submit button which will cause the client to create the HTTP request to example HTML. So what are the different kinds of input types? These are defined in HTML up to 4.01. So you can put text. So that's just, it's an input, it's a text box. When you type, the text appears. Password input type is one where when you type your text, asterisks or dots are put in instead, so you don't see the text that's being put in. A radio button is a set of buttons. The input type radio makes it a single radio button. The name is how they group together. So radio buttons, only one can be clicked at a time. So if you say radio button or input type radio, name sex, value female, that will have and then you can have another radio button, sex, male, and so those two will now not let you choose. You'd only choose one. A checkbox is very similar to a radio button, except for you can have multiple checkboxes selected, and the name is how they're grouped together. And then the submit button is an input type submit, and when you hit the button, the contents of all the inputs in the text area are read. The request is generated and is sent to the target. That's all I have. Very simple. Enough information to get you going on basic HTML. Thank you for your attention.